What would you do if the child you sacrificed everything for, the son you worked 3 jobs to raise, the boy you stayed up countless nights nursing through fevers and fears, looked you in the eye and told you that you weren't worth the roof over your head? For Cordelia Whitmore, 72 years of unconditional love shattered in a single sentence. After her husband's death left her with nowhere else to go, she moved in with her son Grayson, believing family meant forever. She cooked their meals, cared for their children, and tried to make herself useful, anything to justify her existence in their home. But to Grayson and his wife Sloane, she wasn't family. She was a burden. And the day he said those words, "If you don't want to sleep in the garage, earn your keep," something inside Cordelia broke. But what Grayson never expected was that by breaking her down, he was awakening something he couldn't control. A strength buried beneath decades of sacrifice. A woman who had forgotten her own worth, but was about to remember. Stay with me, because Cordelia's journey from invisible mother to unbreakable woman will remind you that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. And sometimes, the people who hurt us the most are the ones who need to see us rise. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and brown sugar. Cordelia's hands moved with practiced efficiency, folding the dough over itself, pressing down with the heel of her palm. The morning light slanted through the window above the sink, catching dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. She'd been up since 5:30, the way she'd been every morning for the past 18 months, ever since Harold died and Grayson insisted she come live with them. Insisted. That was the word he'd used. As if she'd had a choice. The apple turnovers were Grayson's favorite, the same recipe she'd made every Sunday when he was a boy. Back then, he'd sit at the kitchen table with flour on his nose, stealing bits of apple filling when he thought she wasn't looking. She'd pretend not to notice, hiding her smile as she crimped the edges of the pastry. That boy was gone now, replaced by a man she barely recognized. Cordelia wiped her hands on her apron, the faded blue one with yellow daisies that Harold had bought her 30 years ago, and slid the baking sheet into the oven. The house was still quiet. Grayson and Sloane wouldn't be up for another hour, and the twins were spending the weekend at Sloane's mother's house. The silence should have been peaceful. Instead, it pressed against her chest like a weight. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the small breakfast nook, the one nobody else ever used. Her spot. The morning paper lay folded on the counter, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she stared at her hands, weathered, age-spotted, the knuckles slightly swollen from arthritis that had crept in over the last few years. These hands had changed 1,000 diapers, packed 1,000 lunches, worked 1,000 shifts at the factory and the diner and the department store, all to make sure Grayson had everything he needed. Had it been enough? She used to think so. Used to believe that sacrifice was the language of love, that if you gave enough of yourself, the people you loved would see it, would cherish it. Now she wasn't so sure. The timer on the oven beeped softly. Cordelia rose, her knees protesting the movement, and pulled out the turnovers. Golden brown, perfect. She arranged them on a serving plate, the same one she'd used for every special occasion: birthdays, holidays, Sunday breakfasts. The plate had a small chip on one side, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. She knew. She'd dropped it the day of Harold's funeral, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold onto anything. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate. Grayson. Cordelia straightened, smoothing down her apron, arranging her face into something pleasant. Neutral. The way she'd learned to do. He appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his suit despite it being Saturday. His dark hair was combed back from his forehead, and his jaw was set in that familiar line of tension. He looked so much like Harold, same strong nose, same broad shoulders, but there was a hardness in his eyes that Harold had never had. Morning, Cordelia said softly, gesturing to the turnovers. I made your favorite. Grayson barely glanced at them. He poured himself coffee, black, no sugar, and leaned against the counter with his phone in his other hand. His thumb scrolled rapidly across the screen. You didn't have to do that, he said, not looking up. I know. I wanted to. Silence. Just the sound of his thumb against glass, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock. Cordelia folded her hands in her lap, waiting. This was how mornings went now. She spoke, he didn't respond, and the space between them grew wider. Grayson, she began carefully, I was thinking maybe this afternoon I could take Iris and Hollis to the park when they get back. They mentioned wanting to. They're not coming back until Sunday night. Oh. She nodded, swallowing the disappointment. Well, maybe next weekend. Sloane's mother is taking them to some art thing. They'll be busy. Of course. Sloane's mother. The woman who lived in a pristine townhouse downtown and wore designer clothes and had never worked a day in her life because she'd married a lawyer. The woman who looked at Cordelia like she was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. Cordelia's fingers twisted in her lap. I just thought it might be nice to spend some time with them. I haven't seen them much lately. Finally, Grayson looked up from his phone. His gaze was flat, assessing. They're kids. They have activities. Friends. You can't expect them to drop everything just because you're lonely. The words landed like a slap. Cordelia's breath caught, but she forced herself to keep her expression steady. I didn't mean, I'm not trying to impose. I just miss them. You see them every day. I see them at dinner. For 20 minutes. Before they go upstairs to do homework. Grayson's jaw tightened. He set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. What exactly do you want from me, Mom? The question hung in the air, sharp-edged and dangerous. Cordelia's heart began to race. She could feel it building, the thing they'd been dancing around for months. The resentment that simmered just beneath every conversation. I don't want anything, she said quietly. I'm grateful you let me stay here after your father. Let you. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You act like you're some kind of guest. Like this is temporary. Cordelia's hands had gone cold. I thought this was my home now. Your home. Grayson set down his phone, crossing his arms over his chest. Do you pay rent? Utilities? Groceries? I help out. I cook, I clean, I watch the kids. When we need you to. Which isn't often. His voice had taken on a cutting edge, the tone he probably used in boardrooms when he wanted to intimidate someone into submission. It worked on her. God help her, it worked. You're here because Sloane and I felt sorry for you. Because you had nowhere else to go. The words were designed to wound, and they did. Cordelia felt something crack inside her chest, a hairline fracture spreading through everything she'd tried to hold together. I see, she whispered. Do you? Grayson moved closer, and Cordelia had to fight the urge to step back. Because from where I'm standing, you've been acting like you're entitled to be here. Like we owe you something. I never said. You don't have to say it. It's in every disappointed look, every guilt trip about not spending enough time with the kids. Every morning I wake up to find you've rearranged something or made some meal I didn't ask for. He gestured at the turnovers. I don't want these. I'm watching my carbs. But you'll make them anyway because it makes you feel useful. Cordelia's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. Not here. Not now. What do you want me to do? I want you to contribute. Actually contribute, not just putter around the house pretending to be helpful. Grayson picked up his coffee, his tone shifting into something almost casual, which somehow made it worse. Get a job. Pay your share. Or, he paused, letting the word settle. Find somewhere else to live. The kitchen tilted. Cordelia gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. A job? Is that really so unreasonable? You're 72, not 90. Plenty of people your age work. I haven't worked in 15 years. Not since your father got sick, and I had to take care of him full-time. Then it's time to get back out there. Grayson's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing something completely mundane. As if he hadn't just dismantled her entire world with a handful of sentences. I'll give you 2 weeks to find something. After that. He shrugged. We'll need to have a different conversation. He left the kitchen before she could respond, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Cordelia heard a door close somewhere above her, and then the house fell silent again. She stood there, gripping the counter, trying to breathe through the tightness in her chest. The turnovers sat cooling on their plate, golden and perfect and utterly unwanted. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own life? Like the people who should know you best can't see you at all? Cordelia walked slowly to the breakfast nook and sat down. Her coffee had gone cold. She didn't bother to reheat it. Instead, she stared out the window at the manicured backyard, Sloane's pride and joy, maintained by a landscaping service that came every Tuesday, and tried to remember when things had changed. It wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 small ones. The way Sloane had smiled tightly when Grayson first suggested Cordelia move in, her lips pressed together like she was biting back words. The way the guest room had been given to her without discussion, the smallest room in the house, barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser. The way family dinners had shifted from the dining room to the kitchen island, where there were only 4 stools and Cordelia always ended up eating standing by the sink. The way Grayson had stopped hugging her hello, stopped asking about her day, stopped looking at her like she mattered. When had her son become a stranger? The memory came unbidden, sharp and vivid despite the years. Grayson was 7 years old, his front teeth missing, his knees scabbed from some playground adventure. They were sitting at the kitchen table of their old apartment, the one-bedroom place above the laundromat where Cordelia had worked double shifts while Harold was deployed overseas. She was helping Grayson with his homework, her eyes gritty from lack of sleep, her body aching from standing all day. "Mom?" His voice had been small, uncertain. Tommy's mom brought cupcakes to school today. For his birthday. He'd drawn a careful circle on his paper, shading it in with his pencil. "Can you bring cupcakes for my birthday?" Cordelia's heart had squeezed. She'd been saving every penny for the security deposit on a better apartment, somewhere with 2 bedrooms so Grayson wouldn't have to sleep on the couch anymore. Cupcakes weren't in the budget. But she'd looked at his hopeful face, those missing teeth, and said, "Of course, baby. What kind do you want?" His whole face had lit up. "Chocolate. With sprinkles." She'd worked an extra shift that week, her feet blistering in her cheap shoes, and baked those cupcakes herself at midnight. 24 of them, chocolate with rainbow sprinkles, each one carefully frosted. She delivered them to his classroom the next day, still in her work uniform, and Grayson had hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. "You're the best mom in the whole world," he'd whispered. She'd believed him. Cordelia's hands shook as she picked up her coffee mug. The memory hurt more than Grayson's words, because it reminded her of what they used to have. What they used to be. What happened to that little boy? She knew the answer, even if she didn't want to face it. He'd grown up. He'd gone to college, the expensive one she couldn't afford, but worked 3 jobs to pay for anyway. He'd gotten his MBA. He'd married Sloane, whose father owned half the commercial real estate in the city. He'd climbed and climbed until he'd reached a place where his mother, with her aging hands and her simple recipes and her faded apron, didn't fit anymore. She was an embarrassment. A reminder of where he'd come from. A woman who belonged in a laundromat, not a house with heated floors and a 3-car garage. The tears came then, hot and silent. Cordelia pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking. She cried for the boy who'd needed her. She cried for the man who didn't. She cried for Harold, who died never knowing his son would become this person. She cried for herself, for all the years she'd given, all the dreams she'd deferred, all the pieces of herself she'd carved away thinking it was love. It was love, wasn't it? Or had it been something else? Something smaller, more desperate. The fear of being alone. The belief that if she just gave enough, sacrificed enough, she'd be worthy of keeping. The kitchen door opened. Cordelia quickly wiped her eyes, straightening in her chair. Sloane entered, already dressed in yoga pants and a designer athletic top, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never had to question her place in the world. "Oh," Sloane said, stopping short when she saw Cordelia. "You're still here." As if Cordelia were an intruder. As if this weren't supposed to be her home. "I was just having coffee," Cordelia said, her voice rough from crying. Sloane's gaze swept over her, taking in the red eyes, the trembling hands. Something flickered across her face, not quite sympathy, but maybe recognition. She'd gotten what she wanted. Grayson had finally said what she'd been pushing him to say for months. "Grayson told me about your conversation." Sloane moved to the coffee maker, pouring herself a cup. She added cream from a small pitcher, stirring slowly. I think it's good. Healthy. For you to have some independence. Independence. Such a kind word for what was really happening. I haven't worked in years, Cordelia said quietly. Then it'll be an adventure. Sloane's smile was bright brittle. You might even enjoy it. Meeting new people. Having structure to your day. Translation. You're in the way. Cordelia's hands tightened around her mug. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, to point out all the ways she'd tried to help, to contribute. But what was the point? Sloane had already decided. And Grayson, her son, her baby, had agreed. I should start looking today, Cordelia said instead. That would be smart. Sloane took a sip of her coffee, leaning against the counter in a way that seemed almost casual. Almost. Oh, and Cordelia? The garage is being converted into a home gym next month. Just so you know. In case you were wondering about alternatives. The message was clear. There was no safety net. No fallback position. Get a job or get out. Cordelia nodded, not trusting her voice. She stood, leaving her cold coffee on the table, and walked out of the kitchen with as much dignity as she could manage. She made it to her room, the small guest room with the single window that overlooked the neighbor's fence, before the next wave of tears hit. She sank onto the narrow bed, her hands pressed to her mouth to muffle the sound. On the nightstand sat a framed photo, the only one she'd brought from the house she'd shared with Harold. It showed the three of them, her, Harold, and 8-year-old Grayson at the beach. Harold's arm was around her shoulders, both of them squinting into the sun, grinning. Grayson was in front, holding up a sand dollar he'd found, his smile gap-toothed and enormous. They'd been happy then. Poor, exhausted, counting pennies, but happy. When did happy stop being enough? Cordelia picked up the photo, tracing Grayson's young face with one finger. She'd given this boy everything. Her youth, her dreams, her health, her money. She'd worked until her feet bled and her back ached. She'd gone without so he could have. She'd believed, with every fiber of her being, that a mother's love was unconditional. She'd never imagined it wouldn't be returned. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, painting golden squares on the threadbare carpet. Cordelia set down the photo and wiped her eyes. She had 2 weeks. 14 days to find a job, any job, or lose the only home she had left. She'd survived worse. Hadn't she? She'd survived Harold's death. She'd survived years of poverty and uncertainty and fear. She could survive this too. But as she sat in that small room, surrounded by the few possessions she'd been allowed to keep, Cordelia wasn't sure she wanted to just survive anymore. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to remember how to live. Now she'll begin to pick up the pieces and discover she's stronger than anyone, including herself, ever knew. What do you think Cordelia should do? Have you ever had to choose between your dignity and your family? Share your thoughts below. The community center smelled like coffee and old books. Cordelia sat in the hard plastic chair, her purse clutched in her lap, watching the woman behind the desk shuffle through papers. The nameplate read Rita Valdez, director, and Rita herself was somewhere in her 50s, with kind eyes and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. So you're interested in the receptionist position, Rita said, glancing up with a warm smile. Yes. Cordelia's voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat. Yes, I am. Any recent work experience? Recent. That was the problem, wasn't it? Cordelia folded her hands tighter. I worked retail for many years. Customer service. And before that, I was a secretary at a law office. She didn't mention it had been in 1987. I'm a hard worker. Reliable. I learn quickly. Rita studied her for a moment, and Cordelia braced herself for the polite rejection. She'd been to 4 other places in the last week, a grocery store, a department store, a coffee shop, and a restaurant. Each time, the managers had looked at her resume, then looked at her, and she could see the calculation happening behind their eyes. Too old. Too slow. Too much of a liability. But Rita just smiled wider. You know what? I like you. We don't get many applicants for this position because the pay isn't great and the hours can be unpredictable. But if you're willing to learn our scheduling system and don't mind answering phones and greeting people all day, the job's yours." Cordelia's heart lurched. Really? Really? Can you start Monday? Yes. Yes, absolutely. The relief was so overwhelming she felt dizzy. Thank you. Thank you so much. Rita stood, extending her hand. Welcome to Riverside Community Center, Cordelia. I think you're going to fit in just fine. As Cordelia shook her hand, she felt something unfurl in her chest, something small and tentative, but undeniably there. Hope. She told Grayson that evening at dinner. Or rather, she tried to. He was on his phone as usual, scrolling through emails while mechanically eating the chicken and vegetables she'd prepared. Sloane sat across from him, picking at her salad, her own phone face up on the table beside her plate. "I got a job," Cordelia said into the silence. Grayson didn't look up. A job. At the community center. I start Monday. That's good. His thumb kept moving across the screen. What's it pay? Cordelia's fingers tightened around her fork. She'd known he'd ask. $15 an hour. Part-time to start, but Rita said it could become full-time if. 15. Grayson finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. An hour. It's a start. It's minimum wage. It's slightly above minimum wage, actually. Cordelia kept her voice steady, even as heat crept up her neck. And it's honest work. Sloane set down her fork with a delicate clink. Well, it's better than nothing, I suppose. At least you'll be contributing something. Something. As if the years she'd spent raising Grayson, caring for Harold, keeping houses running, as if all of that had been nothing. Cordelia stood, picking up her plate even though she'd barely touched her food. I'll clean up. Leave it, Grayson said, still not looking at her. We'll load the dishwasher later. We. Not you. The exclusion was so casual, so complete. Cordelia set down her plate and left the dining room, climbing the stairs to her small room. Behind her, she heard Sloane laugh at something on her phone, the sound bright and careless. She closed her door and leaned against it, breathing slowly. 2 weeks ago, she would have cried. Today, she just felt tired. And beneath the tiredness, something else. Something that felt almost like anger. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, October settling into November with its usual Chicago bite. Cordelia dressed carefully in slacks and a cardigan, both several years old but clean and pressed. She'd been up since 5, her stomach churning with nerves. It had been so long since she'd had anywhere to be, anyone depending on her for anything beyond cooking and cleaning. The community center was a 15-minute bus ride from Grayson's house. Cordelia had asked to borrow Sloane's second car, the BMW that mostly just sat in the garage, but Sloane had given her a pitying smile and said, I might need it. For what, she hadn't specified. So Cordelia stood at the bus stop, her purse held close, watching her breath mist in the cold air. A few other people waited with her, a teenage boy with headphones, a tired-looking woman in scrubs, an elderly man with a cane. None of them looked at each other. This was the unspoken rule of public transit. We are all alone together. The bus rumbled up, and Cordelia climbed aboard, fishing exact change from her purse. She took a seat near the back, watching the city slide past the window. Grayson's neighborhood gave way to older areas, the houses smaller and closer together, the lawns less manicured. This was the part of the city she remembered from when Grayson was young, before Harold's veteran benefits and her factory job had finally let them buy their tiny house. She'd been happy in that house. She realized it suddenly, with a pang so sharp it hurt. Happy in a way she hadn't been in Grayson's pristine mini-mansion with its marble countertops and its cold, echoing spaces. The community center was a squat brick building with cheerful yellow doors and a parking lot that had seen better days. Inside, it was warm and cluttered, bulletin boards covered in flyers for yoga classes and food banks and GED programs, mismatched furniture in the lobby, a coffee maker burbling in the corner. Rita greeted her with another warm smile. Right on time. Come on, I'll show you the desk. The reception area was small but organized, with an old desktop computer, a multi-line phone that looked like it dated from the 90s, and a three-ring binder labeled Schedule in large block letters. Rita spent the morning walking Cordelia through everything: how to answer the phone, Riverside Community Center, this is Cordelia, how can I help you, how to check people in for classes, how to handle room reservation requests. It was overwhelming. But it was also something Cordelia hadn't felt in months: useful. At noon, Rita insisted she take a lunch break. There's a staff room in the back. Microwave, fridge, help yourself to coffee. Just be back by 1. Cordelia had packed a sandwich, turkey and cheese, made from the lunch meat she'd bought with her own money at the grocery store, a small act of independence that had felt monumental. She headed toward the staff room, navigating the narrow hallway lined with photos of community events and children's artwork. That's when she heard the voice. Absolutely not. I've told you 3 times, we cannot accommodate that many people in the pottery studio. It's a fire hazard. Cordelia paused at the doorway. A woman stood at the counter, pouring coffee with sharp, irritated movements. She was probably around Cordelia's age, maybe a few years younger, with silver hair cut in a stylish bob and wearing a purple tunic over black leggings. Silver earrings dangled from her ears, catching the light. I don't care if it's for a charity event, the woman continued into her phone, her tone exasperated, but somehow still warm. Rules are rules, Margaret. Tell them 40 people max, or they can find another venue. A pause. Yes, I know I'm a tyrant. It's part of my charm. I'll talk to you later. She hung up and turned, nearly colliding with Cordelia. Oh, sorry, didn't see you there. Her face broke into a grin. You must be the new receptionist Rita hired. Cordelia, right? Yes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop. Please. That wasn't eavesdropping, that was me being loud in a small space. The woman extended her hand. Hello in March. I run the art programs here. Welcome to organized chaos. Cordelia shook her hand, startled by the firm grip and the genuine warmth in Alohan's smile. Thank you. It's nice to meet you. First day. At Cordelia's nod, Alohan gestured to the small table in the corner. Sit. Eat your lunch. Tell me your life story. Or don't. We can talk about the weather. I'm flexible. There was something about Alohan, a kind of ease, a lack of judgment, that made Cordelia's shoulders relax slightly. She sat, unwrapping her sandwich with careful movements. Alohan settled across from her with her coffee and what appeared to be leftover pasta. So, Alohan said, spearing a piece of penne, what brings you to our humble establishment? Career change? Boredom? Secret passion for bureaucracy? Cordelia managed a small smile. I needed a job. Don't we all? But specifically? Something in Alohan's eyes, a genuine curiosity, not nosiness, made Cordelia want to answer honestly. I'm living with my son. He suggested I should contribute financially. Alohan nodded slowly. The old, you're a burden so get a job maneuver. Classic. Cordelia's head snapped up. I didn't say. You didn't have to. Alohan's voice was gentle. Honey, I've been around the block enough times to recognize the signs. That look in your eyes? I've seen it in the mirror. She took a sip of coffee. My daughter pulled the same thing 5 years ago. Told me I should downsize from my house, the one I'd lived in for 30 years, because it was too much for me to handle. Translation: she wanted me to sell it so she could have her inheritance early. What did you do? Told her to go to hell. Alohan grinned. Well, not in those exact words. I'm classy. But close enough. Kept my house, started working here, and haven't looked back. She leaned forward slightly. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who forget we're not just here for their convenience. The words hit Cordelia like a physical blow. She set down her sandwich, her appetite suddenly gone. He's my son. And you're his mother. Which means you're a whole person, with your own needs and dignity. Alohan's gaze was steady. Working here, that's good. But make sure you're doing it for you, not just to appease someone else's expectations. Cordelia wanted to argue, to defend Grayson, to explain that it was complicated. But sitting there under Alohan's knowing gaze, she couldn't find the words. Because maybe it wasn't complicated. Maybe it was exactly as simple as Aloan made it sound. I don't know what I'm doing, Cordelia whispered. Nobody does. That's the secret they don't tell you. Aloan reached across the table, squeezing Cordelia's hand briefly. But you showed up. That's something. That's actually a lot. The weeks began to blur together in a way that was both exhausting and oddly liberating. Cordelia fell into a routine. Wake at 6, catch the 7:15 bus, arrive at the center by 8. Answer phones, greet visitors, update the schedule, field questions about everything from pottery classes to food pantry hours. Break for lunch, usually spent with Aloan, who had somehow decided they were friends without asking permission first. Back to work until 4, then the bus home, arriving by 5 to start dinner. Grayson barely acknowledged her new schedule. Sloane made pointed comments about the house being less organized now that Cordelia wasn't home all day, conveniently ignoring that they had a cleaning service that came twice a week. But something was shifting inside Cordelia. Small things, barely noticeable at first. The way she stood a little straighter when she answered the phone. The confidence that crept into her voice when she solved a scheduling conflict. The satisfaction of receiving her first paycheck, meager, but hers. One afternoon in late November, she was filing paperwork at the front desk when Aloan appeared, slightly out of breath. Cordelia. Emergency. Need your help. Cordelia looked up, alarmed. What's wrong? My painting class is in 10 minutes and my model canceled. I need someone to sit for a still life. Aloan's eyes were pleading. Just sit in a chair. Maybe hold a book. Look contemplative. Can you do that? I'm working. Rita already said it's fine. She's covering the desk. Please? These are beginners. They need something to paint or they'll just stare at blank canvases for an hour, and that's depressing for everyone. Before Cordelia could fully process what was happening, she was being led down the hallway to a bright room filled with easels. 8 people of various ages looked up as they entered, mostly older adults, though there was one young man who looked like he might be in college. Everyone, this is Cordelia, Aloan announced. She's graciously agreed to model for us today. She positioned Cordelia in a chair by the window, handed her a book, adjusted her shoulder slightly. Perfect. Just sit naturally. Don't worry about being still. This is painting, not photography. Cordelia sat, the book unopened in her lap, acutely aware of 8 sets of eyes studying her. It should have felt uncomfortable, intrusive. Instead, it felt strange and new and oddly seen. For the next hour, she sat while brushes whispered against canvas, while Aloan circulated with gentle critiques and encouragement. The late afternoon light shifted through the window, painting everything gold. Cordelia found herself relaxing into the chair, her mind drifting. When had she last done something just for herself? When had anyone last looked at her, really looked, and tried to capture what they saw? All right, time's up, Aloan called. Let our model stretch her legs. And let's see what we've created. Cordelia stood, her back stiff from sitting, and Aloan waved her over. Come look. She approached the easels hesitantly. The paintings were all different, some more skilled than others, some abstract interpretations, some attempting realism. But what struck Cordelia was that in each one, she looked peaceful, thoughtful. The lines on her face weren't erasures of beauty, but marks of a life lived. Her age wasn't hidden or minimized. It simply was. What do you think? Aloan asked quietly beside her. I think. Cordelia's throat tightened. I think I forgot what I looked like. Then maybe it's time to remember. That evening, Cordelia arrived home to find Grayson in the kitchen, which was unusual. He was rarely home before 7, and when he was, he went straight to his home office. But there he stood at the island, loosening his tie, a glass of bourbon in his hand. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Cordelia set down her purse carefully. About what? Sloane and I have been discussing your situation. He took a sip of bourbon, not looking at her. The job is fine. Good even. But you're still not contributing enough to justify you living here rent-free. The words were carefully chosen, rehearsed. Cordelia could hear Sloane's voice beneath them. I give you money every week, Cordelia said quietly. For groceries. For utilities. $100 a week. Grayson finally met her eyes. That doesn't even cover your food costs. It's what I can afford right now. Rita said in a few months, if I'm doing well, the position might become full-time. A few months. Grayson laughed, but it was a cold sound. And in the meantime, what? We're just supposed to subsidize you. Subsidize. As if she were a failing business. As if the years she'd spent raising him, the sacrifices she'd made, counted for nothing. What do you want me to do? Cordelia asked, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I want you to be realistic. You're 72. Working part-time at a community center isn't a career. It's not sustainable. He set down his glass. Maybe it's time to look at other options. Like what? There are senior living communities. Affordable ones, with government assistance. You could have your own place. Independence. The way he said independence made it clear he meant something else. Distance. Separation. Out of sight, out of mind. Cordelia's hands had gone numb. You want me to move into a nursing home? It's not a nursing home. It's assisted living. There's a difference. I don't need assistance. She stopped, because what did she need? A son who loved her? A home that felt like home? Those things seemed impossibly far away, like stars she could see but never reach. You need to think about your future, Grayson said, and his tone had softened slightly, as if he actually believed he was being kind. This arrangement isn't working. For any of us. It's working fine for me. The words came out before Cordelia could stop them, sharp and unexpected. Grayson's eyebrows rose. Excuse me. I said it's working fine for me. Cordelia's heart was pounding, but she kept going. I have a job. I'm making friends. I'm contributing what I can. If that's not enough for you, then maybe the problem isn't me. The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Grayson's jaw tightened, his eyes going cold in a way that reminded her, suddenly and painfully, of his grandfather, Harold's father, the man who'd abandoned them when Harold was just a boy. The man Harold had sworn he'd never become. But patterns repeat, don't they? No matter how hard we try to break them. Be very careful, Grayson said quietly, about the position you're taking. You're in my house. Under my roof. If you can't show some gratitude, I am grateful. Cordelia's voice shook now, but she didn't back down. I've been grateful every single day. I've thanked you. I've tried to help. I've stayed out of the way. But nothing I do is ever enough, is it? Because you don't want a mother. You want a ghost. Someone who exists only when convenient and disappears the rest of the time. That's not fair. Isn't it? The tears came then, hot and angry. When's the last time you asked me how I was doing? When's the last time we had a real conversation? When's the last time you looked at me like I was your mother instead of an obligation? Grayson's face had gone pale. I've given you a place to live. You've given me a room. There's a difference. The kitchen door opened. Sloane stepped in, her yoga mat tucked under her arm, her expression carefully neutral. But Cordelia saw the satisfaction in her eyes. She'd been listening. Probably hoping for exactly this. Everything okay? Sloane asked, her tone light. Fine, Grayson said shortly. We were just discussing Mom's living arrangements. Oh. Sloane set down her yoga mat, moving to the refrigerator to pull out a bottle of water. Have you made a decision? The we was silent but obvious. Cordelia looked between them and saw the truth clearly for the first time. This wasn't Grayson's idea. Or if it was, Sloane had planted the seed, watered it, and watched it grow. She'd been working on him for months, slowly turning him against his own mother. And Grayson, her son, her baby, had let her. I'll move out, Cordelia heard herself say. Both of them turned to her, surprise flickering across their faces. They hadn't expected her to say it first. To take away their power. Mom, Grayson started. No, you're right. This isn't working. Cordelia wiped her eyes, straightening her shoulders. I'll find somewhere else to live. It might take me a few weeks, but I'll figure it out. Where will you go? There was something in Grayson's voice, not quite concern, but maybe the ghost of it. The memory of a boy who'd once loved her without conditions. I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. She picked up her purse, walking toward the stairs. Then she paused, looking back at him. You know, your father would be so disappointed in you right now. It was cruel. She knew it was cruel even as the words left her mouth. But watching Grayson flinch, seeing genuine pain flash across his face, Cordelia felt a grim satisfaction. Good. Let him hurt. Let him carry that for a while. She climbed the stairs to her small room and closed the door. Then she sat on the bed, her hands trembling, and tried to figure out what she'd just done. She'd stood up to him. After months of swallowing her pride, of making herself small, she'd finally said the truth out loud. And it should have felt liberating. Instead, it just felt terrifying. Because now she had to follow through. Now she had to find a place to live on a part-time receptionist's salary. Now she had to prove she could survive without them. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Aloan. Rita gave me your number. Coffee tomorrow morning before your shift? There's something I want to show you. Cordelia stared at the message for a long moment. Then, with shaking fingers, she typed back, yes. Thank you. She didn't know what Aloan wanted to show her. But right now, she needed anything that felt like hope. The next morning, Cordelia met Aloan at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the community center. It was a small place, the kind with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Aloan was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. Sit, Aloan commanded, pushing 1 cup toward her. I got you a latte. If you hate it, we'll get you something else. Cordelia sat, wrapping her cold hands around the warm cup. She'd barely slept, her mind churning through impossible calculations. Apartments required first and last month's rent. Security deposits. Furniture. How was she supposed to afford any of that on $15 an hour? You look terrible, Aloan said bluntly. Thank you. What happened? And somehow, sitting there with this woman she'd known for barely a month, Cordelia found herself telling the whole story. The fight with Grayson. The ultimatum. Her rash decision to move out. I don't even know why I said it, Cordelia finished, her voice hollow. I have no plan. No savings. Nothing. Aloan was quiet for a moment, sipping her coffee thoughtfully. Then she set down her cup and leaned forward. I have a proposal for you. What kind of proposal? My house has a guest suite. Separate entrance, small kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. My late husband built it for his mother, but she died before she could use it. It's been sitting empty for 3 years. Aloan held up a hand before Cordelia could speak. Before you say no, hear me out. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a rental arrangement. You pay me what you can afford, we'll figure out a fair amount. In exchange, you have your own space, your independence, and you don't have to live with people who make you feel like garbage. Cordelia's throat closed. I can't. Why not? Because it's too much. Because I barely know you. Because her voice cracked. Because I don't understand why you do this for me. Aloan's expression softened. 5 years ago, when my daughter told me to sell my house, I had a friend who offered me almost the same thing. A place to stay until I figured out my next move. I was too proud to take it, and I spent 6 months sleeping on a different friend's couch, feeling like a burden everywhere I went. She reached across the table, covering Cordelia's hand with hers. I don't want that for you. And maybe call me crazy, but I like having someone around. The house is too quiet. You'd actually be doing me a favor. I don't believe that. Then believe this. You deserve better than what you're getting. And someone needs to remind you of that. Cordelia felt the tears coming again, but this time they were different. Not tears of hurt or anger, but something closer to relief. To gratitude so profound it hurt. I'll pay you, she managed. Whatever we agree on, I'll pay every penny. I know you will. Aloan squeezed her hand once and released it. You can move in this weekend. I'll help. We'll make it work. Moving day arrived cold and bright. Cordelia had expected it to be harder, to feel like failure, like defeat. Instead, as she packed her few belongings into the boxes Aloan had brought, she felt something else. Lightness. Grayson didn't help. He'd left early for a business trip to New York, which Cordelia suspected wasn't entirely coincidental. Sloane hovered in the doorway of the small bedroom, watching with poorly concealed satisfaction. If you need anything, Sloane said, her tone suggesting she hoped Cordelia wouldn't. You know where we are. Cordelia folded one of Harold's old sweaters, the one she'd kept even though it no longer smelled like him, and placed it carefully in the box. I'll be fine. Well, good luck. The words were empty. Cordelia heard what Sloane didn't say. Good riddance. Eloan arrived with her car, an ancient Honda with a questionable muffler, and together they loaded boxes. It didn't take long. Cordelia's entire life fit into the trunk and back seat with room to spare. As they pulled away from Grayson's house, Cordelia looked back once. The house stood pristine and cold, all sharp angles and perfect landscaping. A monument to success, to having made it. But there was no warmth there. No love. Maybe there never had been. Don't look back, Eloan said gently. Trust me. It doesn't help. Cordelia turned forward, watching the neighborhood give way to older, tree-lined streets. Eloan's house, when they arrived, was a charming brick bungalow with a wild garden and a crooked mailbox. It looked lived in. Loved. Real. The guest suite was small but perfect, a bedroom with a bay window, a bathroom with vintage tiles, a kitchenette just big enough for one person. It smelled faintly of lavender and dust. We'll air it out, Eloan said, opening windows. Get you some fresh linens. It'll feel like home in no time. Home. Cordelia stood in the center of the room, surrounded by her boxes, and tried to remember what that word meant. That night, after Eloan had helped her unpack and insisted she come to the main house for dinner, Cordelia lay in her new bed and stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. Her phone sat silent on the nightstand. No call from Grayson. No text. Just silence. She waited for the loneliness to crush her. But instead, she felt something unexpected. Peace. For the first time in 2 years, she was alone. But she wasn't lonely. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something new. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. Work at the community center. Lunches with Eloan. Evenings in her small suite, learning to cook for one again, reading books from Eloan's extensive library. Simple things. Quiet things. But also new things. Eloan convinced her to take one of the art classes. Just try it, she'd said. Worst case, you hate it and never come back. Cordelia hadn't painted since she was a young woman, before Grayson was born. She'd loved it then, watercolors mostly, landscapes and flowers. But there'd never been time after. Never been money for supplies. Never been space to make a mess. The first class was terrifying. Her hands shook as she mixed paints, and everything she created looked childish and wrong. But Eloan moved through the room with patient encouragement, and by the second class, something shifted. Cordelia stopped worrying about making something good. She just painted. It was December now, Christmas decorations appearing in store windows and on lampposts. The community center was planning a holiday party, and Rita had asked Cordelia to help organize it. Real responsibility. Trust. She was sitting at the front desk, creating a sign-up sheet for potluck contributions, when the door opened and a woman walked in with 2 children. It took Cordelia a moment to recognize them. Iris and Hollis. Her grandchildren. They saw her at the same moment, their faces lighting up with identical expressions of joy and surprise. Grandma! Hollis shouted, running forward before the woman, Sloane's younger sister, Cordelia realized, could stop him. Iris followed more slowly, but her smile was just as bright. We didn't know you worked here. Cordelia came around the desk, kneeling to hug them both, her heart swelling so large it hurt. What are you 2 doing here? Art class, Iris said. Aunt Veronica is taking us. Mom said. She trailed off, glancing at her aunt uncertainly. Mom said it would be good for us to expand our horizons, Hollis finished, in a tone that suggested he was parroting words he didn't fully understand. Veronica approached, looking uncomfortable. Cordelia. I didn't know you. Sloane didn't mention. It's fine. Cordelia stood, smoothing down her cardigan. The children's art class is down the hall. Second door on the left. Eloan is wonderful with kids. Thank you. Veronica hesitated, then said quietly, they've been asking about you. I thought. She glanced at the twins, lowered her voice further. I thought this might be a way for them to see you, without it being a whole thing. Understanding dawned. Veronica was going behind Sloane's back. The knowledge filled Cordelia with gratitude and sadness in equal measure. Thank you, she said simply. As Veronica led the twins down the hall, both of them looking back and waving at Cordelia, something cracked in her chest. She'd been so focused on surviving, on moving forward, that she'd tried not to think about what she'd lost. But seeing them, being reminded that they still loved her, still wanted her, it hurt. God, it hurt. Hey! Eloan appeared from the hallway, reading Cordelia's expression with frightening accuracy. Those your grandkids? Cordelia nodded, not trusting her voice. They're beautiful. Eloan squeezed her shoulder. And they're going to be here every Wednesday for the next 8 weeks. Which means you get to see them. Not as much as you want, but something. He doesn't know they're here. Grayson. Probably not. But that's not your problem to solve. Eloan's voice was gentle but firm. You can't control what he does or doesn't know. You can only control what you do. And right now, you're going to sit at this desk, do your job, and be grateful that someone in that family has more sense than your son. She was right. Cordelia knew she was right. But it didn't make it easier. That evening, she painted for the first time in her new suite. She set up her easel by the bay window, where the streetlight cast a warm glow, and she painted from memory. The beach. Harold's arm around her shoulders. Grayson, small and gap-toothed, holding up his sand dollar like a treasure. She painted the happiness she remembered. The family they'd been. And as she worked, as the image took shape on canvas, Cordelia realized something. The past was beautiful. Worth remembering. But she couldn't live there anymore. It was time to paint something new. Christmas approached with its usual mixture of joy and melancholy. The community center was decorated with slightly battered decorations and a tree that leaned precariously to the left. Cordelia helped string lights and hang ornaments, listening to Eloan complain cheerfully about budget cuts and fire codes. She'd received no invitation to Grayson's house for Christmas. No call. No text. Just silence, stretching longer and longer until it began to feel like permanence. On Christmas Eve, Eloan insisted Cordelia join her for dinner. It's just me and my sister, she said. We'll eat too much, drink too much wine, and watch bad movies. Very low-key. Very pathetic. You'll fit right in. It should have hurt, spending Christmas away from family. But sitting in Eloan's warm, cluttered living room, eating homemade lasagna and laughing at a terrible romantic comedy, Cordelia felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like she belonged. Eloan's sister, Margot, was a retired librarian with a wicked sense of humor and no filter. She asked Cordelia blunt questions about her situation, nodding along with evident sympathy and occasional bursts of profanity directed at ungrateful children. They forget, Margot said, refilling Cordelia's wine glass, that they didn't raise themselves. That someone sacrificed for them. And then they act like they're doing us a favor by acknowledging our existence. She raised her glass. To mothers who deserve better. To mothers who deserve better, Eloan echoed, and Cordelia found herself drinking to her own worth, the wine warm and fortifying. Later, after Margot had gone home and Eloan had disappeared to her bedroom, Cordelia stood alone in her little suite, looking at the small tree Eloan had insisted on setting up for her. It was decorated with simple ornaments, a strand of white lights, and, at the top, a slightly crooked star. Her phone buzzed. For a wild moment, her heart leapt. Maybe Grayson. Maybe the twins, maybe. It was a text from an unknown number. Merry Christmas, Grandma. We miss you. Love, Iris and Hollis. Cordelia's hands shook as she typed back, Merry Christmas, my darlings. I miss you too. More than you know. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, Dad doesn't know we're texting. Aunt Veronica gave us your number. Is that okay? Tears blurred Cordelia's vision. That's more than okay. That's wonderful. We'll see you Wednesday. We're making you something in art class. Don't tell Miss Eloan we told you. Your secret is safe with me. I love you both so much. Love you too, Grandma. Cordelia set down her phone and let herself cry, not from sadness this time, but from something closer to hope. Her grandchildren hadn't forgotten her. They were finding ways to stay connected, even if it had to be secret. It wasn't the Christmas she'd imagined, but it was real. And right now, real was enough. January arrived with bitter cold and a determination that settled into Cordelia's bones. Rita offered her full-time hours, and Cordelia accepted without hesitation. The money was still modest, but it was steady. She could pay a low in rent. She could buy her own groceries. She could start saving, slowly, for something that felt almost impossible, a future. Wednesday became her favorite day. The twins arrived like clockwork, Veronica dropping them off with a conspiratorial wink. They'd rushed to the front desk first, showing Cordelia whatever treasures they'd brought, drawings from school, stories they'd written, once a particularly lumpy clay sculpture that Hollis insisted was a dinosaur but looked more like a potato. "It's beautiful," Cordelia had said, and meant it. Eloan let the twins stay a few minutes after class sometimes, and those stolen moments became precious. They'd tell her about school, about their friends, carefully dancing around any mention of their parents. Cordelia learned to read the silence, to understand what they weren't saying. Grayson was working more. Sloane was redecorating again. The house was tense. "Are you okay?" Cordelia asked them once, unable to help herself. Iris had looked at Hollis, some silent communication passing between them. Then she'd nodded. "We're okay, Grandma. We just miss you." "I miss you too. Every day. Why don't you come home?" The question had landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading through Cordelia's chest. Home. They still thought of it as her home. Still thought of her as someone who belonged there. Sometimes, Cordelia had said carefully, people need different kinds of homes. I needed a place where I could be myself. Does that make sense? Hollis had frowned. But you were always yourself. I thought I was. But I'd forgotten what that meant. She'd cupped his face gently. I'm learning to remember. February brought a surprise. Cordelia was reorganizing the supply closet, a task nobody else wanted, when Rita appeared in the doorway. Cordelia, do you have a minute? Of course. Cordelia set down a box of construction paper, brushing dust from her hands. Rita leaned against the doorframe, her expression thoughtful. I've been watching you these past few months. The way you handle difficult situations, the way people respond to you. You're good at this job. Really good. Thank you. I enjoy it. How would you feel about taking on more responsibility? We're starting a senior outreach program, home visits, wellness checks, connecting isolated seniors with resources. It would mean a small raise, some training, but also more hours in the field rather than behind the desk. Cordelia's heart began to race. You want me to do that? I think you'd be perfect for it. You have empathy. You listen. And you understand what it's like to feel invisible. Rita's smile was warm. Think about it. Let me know by the end of the week. As Rita walked away, Cordelia stood in the supply closet, surrounded by markers and glue sticks and poster board, and felt something shift. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was becoming a purpose. She found Eloan in the art room, cleaning brushes with her usual efficiency. Rita offered me a promotion, Cordelia said without preamble. Eloan turned, eyebrows raised. And I think I want to say yes. But I'm scared. Of what? Of failing. Of being too old for this. Of Cordelia's voice dropped. Of proving Grayson right. That I'm not capable. That I need to be taken care of. Eloan set down the brushes and wiped her hands on her apron. Can I tell you something my mother told me when I was 45 and terrified to leave my terrible marriage? Cordelia nodded. She said, the only way to prove them wrong is to stop caring about proving them wrong. Do it for yourself, not for them. Eloan's eyes were fierce. You don't owe Grayson proof of anything. You don't owe him success or failure or justification. You owe yourself the chance to try. That's it. That's all that matters. What if I fail? Then you fail. And you try something else. That's how life works. Eloan squeezed her shoulder. But I don't think you will. I think you're going to be amazing at this. And I think deep down, you know it too. That night, Cordelia sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notepad. She made a list, pros and cons, fears and hopes. At the bottom, she wrote, "What would Harold say?" She knew the answer immediately. He'd tell her to go for it. He'd always been the one pushing her forward, believing in her even when she didn't believe in herself. Before he got sick, before the medical bills and the exhaustion, he'd encouraged her to take classes, to pursue her art, to think about what she wanted beyond just being a mother and a wife. She'd always thought there'd be time later. After Grayson was grown. After they'd saved more money. After. But after had never come. And now Harold was gone, and she was 72, and if not now, then when? On Friday, Cordelia walked into Rita's office and accepted the position. The training was intensive. Cordelia learned about elder abuse, depression screening, community resources, crisis intervention. She learned how to document visits, how to spot red flags, how to build trust with people who'd spent years being overlooked by everyone else. It was harder than answering phones. More emotionally demanding. Some days she came home exhausted, her heart heavy with the stories she'd heard. But she was good at it. She knew she was good at it because people told her, not just Rita, but the seniors she visited. They opened their doors to her. They invited her in for tea. They shared their fears and their loneliness and sometimes, hesitantly, their hope. She was making a difference. Small, perhaps, but real. March arrived with the promise of spring. The twins had been coming to art class for 3 months now, and their Wednesday visits had become the highlight of Cordelia's week. She'd built a small collection of their artwork on her refrigerator, drawings, paintings, a surprisingly good clay bowl from Iris. Then, one Wednesday, they didn't show up. Cordelia waited at the front desk, watching the door, her stomach twisting with worry. Veronica didn't arrive. The art class started without them. Eloan appeared after 15 minutes. They're not coming? I don't know. They've never missed before. Maybe they're sick. Maybe. But Cordelia's instincts said otherwise. That evening, her phone rang. Not a text, a call. From Veronica. "Cordelia, I'm so sorry." Veronica's voice was tight with stress. "Sloan found out. About the art class. About me bringing the kids to see you." Cordelia's heart sank. "What happened?" She went ballistic. Said I was undermining her authority, going behind her back, teaching the kids to be sneaky. She's forbidden me from taking them anywhere without her explicit permission. Veronica's voice cracked. I tried to argue, but Grayson backed her up. He said she stopped. What did he say? He said you made your choice. That if you wanted to be part of their lives, you should have stayed. The words hit like a physical blow. Cordelia sat down hard on her small couch, the phone pressed to her ear. "I'm sorry," Veronica said again. "I shouldn't have told you that. But I thought you should know. And I thought you should know that the kids are devastated. They've been crying all evening. Can I talk to them?" "Not now. Sloane's watching them like a hawk. But I'll try to find a way. I promise." After Veronica hung up, Cordelia sat in the darkness of her suite, the silence pressing in from all sides. This was Grayson's punishment. Not for leaving, but for daring to be happy without him. For proving she didn't need his permission to exist. He was taking away the only thing he knew would hurt her, her grandchildren. The anger that rose in Cordelia was unlike anything she'd felt before. Not the hot, explosive kind, but something colder. Harder. A fury that settled into her bones and crystallized into determination. She couldn't control what Grayson did, but she wouldn't let him break her. Not again. The next few weeks were some of the hardest Cordelia had experienced. The absence of the twins was a constant ache, a missing piece that colored everything else. But she kept going. Work, art class, dinners with Eloan. She built a life that didn't revolve around waiting for Grayson to decide she was worthy. In early April, during one of her senior wellness visits, Cordelia met a woman named Agnes. She lived alone in a small apartment filled with books and photographs, her walls covered in paintings she'd done over the years, vibrant, powerful abstracts that made Cordelia stop in her tracks. "You're an artist," Cordelia said, awed. Agnes, 83 and sharp as ever despite her failing eyesight, smiled. Was. Can't see well enough anymore to paint the way I want to. They talked for over an hour, far longer than the standard visit required. Agnes told stories about her life, the lovers she'd had, the adventures, the years she'd spent in Paris trying to make it as an artist. She'd never married, never had children. Do you regret it? Cordelia asked. Not having a family? Agnes had considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But I made my choices. And they were good ones for me. The thing people don't tell you is that there's no right way to live a life. Only your way. She leaned forward, her clouded eyes somehow still piercing. But here's what I learned late. Even when you've made your choices, it's never too late to make new ones. You're not done yet, dear. None of us are until we're in the ground. The words stayed with Cordelia as she drove back to the community center. Not done yet. She was 72, but she wasn't dead. And there was still time, maybe not a lot, but enough, to figure out who she was beyond mother, beyond grandmother, beyond the roles others had assigned her. That evening, she pulled out the painting she'd started months ago, the beach scene with Harold and young Grayson. She'd left it unfinished, unable to complete something that felt so far away from her current reality. Now, she picked up her brush and began to paint again. But this time, she added something new. In the background, barely visible but there, she painted a woman walking away from the beach. Walking toward something unseen, something off the canvas. The figure was small, but her shoulders were straight, her stride purposeful. It was her. Leaving the past. Moving toward something new. May arrived with warmth and possibility. The community center was planning a spring art show, and Eloan had been pestering Cordelia for weeks to submit something. I'm not good enough, Cordelia protested. Says who? Have you seen some of the stuff people submit? You're better than half of them already. Eloan's eyes sparkled with mischief. Besides, it's not about being good. It's about being brave enough to show people what you've created. Brave. When had Cordelia last been brave? When had she last put herself out there, risking judgment, risking rejection? She submitted 3 paintings. The beach scene. A landscape of Eloan's wild garden. And a portrait, not of anyone specific, but a study of an older woman's hands, weathered and strong, holding a paintbrush. The opening night of the art show, Cordelia stood in the community center's main hall, surrounded by easels and people and the hum of conversation. Her paintings hung on the far wall, small and unpretentious among the larger, more ambitious works. But they were hers. She'd made them. And they were here, in the world, for people to see. Rita appeared at her elbow with a glass of wine. Your work is beautiful, Cordelia. Really beautiful. Thank you. Cordelia's throat was tight. I mean it. There's such emotion in them. Such honesty. Rita smiled. You should be proud. Proud. The word felt foreign. But standing there, looking at her paintings, Cordelia realized Rita was right. She was proud. Not because the paintings were perfect, they weren't. But because she'd done something for herself. Something that had nothing to do with being useful or necessary or proving her worth to anyone else. She'd created something simply because she wanted to. The evening wore on, people flowing through the gallery, stopping to admire various works. Cordelia found herself talking to strangers about her paintings, about her process, about how she'd only recently started again after decades away. Their interest was genuine, their questions thoughtful. She was nearly ready to leave, tired but happy, when she heard a familiar voice. Grandma. Cordelia spun around. Iris and Hollis stood near the entrance, their faces lit up with joy. Behind them, looking uncomfortable and uncertain, stood Grayson. Time seemed to slow. Cordelia's heart hammered against her ribs as the twins rushed forward, wrapping their arms around her waist. She hugged them back automatically, her eyes locked on her son. He looked older. Tired. There were lines around his eyes she didn't remember, a tightness in his jaw that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. We saw the flyer, Iris said breathlessly. At Aunt Veronica's house. It said your name. We begged Dad to bring us. I didn't know you painted, Hollis added, tugging her hand toward her paintings. Come show us. Which ones are yours? Cordelia let herself be pulled across the room, acutely aware of Grayson following behind. The twins studied her paintings with serious concentration, pointing out details, asking questions. Their enthusiasm was genuine and utterly unself-conscious. "This one's my favorite," Iris declared, pointing at the beach scene. "Is that Dad? When he was little?" "Yes," Cordelia said softly. "A long time ago. He looks happy." The observation hung in the air. Grayson had moved closer, standing just behind the twins, staring at the painting. His face was unreadable. "Can I talk to you?" he said quietly. "Alone?" Cordelia's first instinct was to refuse, to tell him there was nothing left to say. But the twins were watching, their expressions hopeful and anxious, and she couldn't bring herself to create a scene. "Eloan?" Cordelia called across the room. "Can you keep an eye on these two for a few minutes?" "Of course." Eloan appeared instantly, reading the situation with her usual perceptiveness. "Come on, you two. Let me show you some of the other artwork. There's a sculpture made entirely of recycled materials that you have to see." As the twins were led away, Cordelia turned to Grayson. "There's a courtyard out back." They walked in silence, Cordelia leading him through the building to the small outdoor space that served as a break area for staff. It was empty now, just a few benches and some struggling plants in pots. Grayson sat heavily on one of the benches, his hands clasped between his knees. Cordelia remained standing, her arms crossed. Protective. Defensive. "I didn't know you were an artist," Grayson said finally. "There's a lot you don't know about me." He flinched. "I deserve that. You deserve more than that." Cordelia's voice was steady, but her heart was racing. "You deserve to hear exactly what you've done. How you've made me feel. But I'm not going to do that here, with your children inside, waiting. They miss you. They won't stop talking about you." Grayson looked up, and Cordelia saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. Pain. "They're angry with me. With Sloane. They say we're mean to you. That we treated you badly. And what do you think?" The question was simple, but it held everything. Cordelia watched Grayson struggle with it, watched him try to find a way to defend himself and fail. "I think." He stopped, started again. "I think I forgot who you were. I saw you as this obligation. This burden I had to carry because Dad died and left you with nothing." His voice roughened. "But that wasn't your fault. And I made it your fault." Cordelia's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. "Not now." "Why?" "I don't know. Maybe because Sloane kept saying he stopped himself." "No. That's not fair. I can't blame her. I made my own choices." "Yes, you did. I'm sorry." The words came out broken. "God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I've been Sloane and I have been." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Harold that Cordelia's breath caught. "We're not doing well. The marriage. We're in therapy now. And the therapist asked me to think about patterns. About how I treat people I'm supposed to love. And I realized I've been treating you the way Grandfather treated Dad. Like you're disposable. Like your worth is conditional." His voice cracked. "I swore I'd never be like him. Dad made me promise. And I became him anyway." The admission hung between them, heavy and painful. Cordelia wanted to comfort him, to reach out, to tell him it was okay. But it wasn't okay. And she couldn't pretend it was just to make him feel better. "I needed you," she said quietly. "After your father died, I needed you. And you made me feel like I was a burden for needing anything at all." "I know. Do you?" Cordelia's voice sharpened. "Do you know what it's like to be told by your own child that you're not wanted? That you're not worth a room in their house? That you need to earn the right to exist in their life?" Grayson's face crumpled. "No, I don't know. But I'm learning." He stood, taking a hesitant step toward her. "I can't undo what I did. I know that. But I need to try to make it right." "How?" "I don't know yet. But maybe." He gestured helplessly. "Maybe we could start over. Not go back to how things were, but find something new. Something better." Cordelia looked at her son, this man who'd hurt her so deeply, who'd made her question her own worth, and tried to find forgiveness. It wasn't there yet. Maybe it never would be fully. But underneath the hurt and anger, there was still love. Complicated, painful, but real. I can't come back to your house, she said firmly. I have my own place now. My own life. And I need that. I need to know I can survive without you. I understand. And I won't tolerate being treated like a burden. Not ever again. Cordelia's voice was steel. If we're going to have a relationship, it has to be between equals. I'm not asking for your approval or your permission to exist. I'm offering you the chance to know me. Really know me. But only if you can treat me with respect. Grayson nodded, tears tracking down his face. Okay. Yes. Whatever you need. I need you to let me see my grandchildren. Not secret visits arranged behind your wife's back. Real, actual time with them. Done. I promise. He wiped his eyes. Sloane and we're working on things. Part of that is her recognizing how she's driven wedges between me and other people, including you. She owes you an apology too. I don't need her apology. Cordelia's voice was cold. I need her to stop poisoning my relationship with my son and my grandchildren. If she can do that, we can coexist. If she can't. She left the thread unfinished. They stood in the courtyard, the evening air cooling around them. Inside, Cordelia could hear the murmur of the art show continuing, life moving forward without them. I saw your paintings, Grayson said softly. They're really good, Mom. I never knew you had that talent. You never asked. No, I didn't. He met her eyes. I want to ask now. I want to know everything I missed. If you'll let me. Cordelia considered him for a long moment. The boy he'd been. The man he'd become. The person he might still grow into if he was willing to do the work. We'll see, she said finally. This doesn't fix everything, Grayson. This is just the beginning of a very long conversation. I know. And I'm not the same person I was when I lived with you. I've changed. I'm still changing. You might not like who I'm becoming. I think, Grayson said, his voice thick with emotion, that I'm going to like who you're becoming a lot more than I liked who I tried to make you be. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a crack in the wall. A possibility of light. The twins are waiting, Cordelia said. Let's go back inside. As they walked back through the building, Grayson beside her but not touching, Cordelia felt something shift in her chest. The fear that had lived there for so long, the fear of losing him, of not being enough, of being abandoned, was still present. But it was smaller now. Because she knew, with absolute certainty, that even if Grayson disappeared from her life again, she would survive. She would more than survive. She would live. And maybe that was the real transformation. Not being wanted by others, but wanting herself. Believing she was worth the space she took up. Worth the air she breathed. Worth the life she was building. In the gallery, the twins rushed over, chattering about sculptures and paintings, and could they please take art classes here, Dad, please? Grayson looked at Cordelia. She nodded. Okay, he told them. We'll sign you up. Their joy was incandescent. They hugged Cordelia again, promised to see her next week, and dragged their father off to look at more artwork. Eloan appeared at Cordelia's side, watching them go. So, Cordelia echoed. We'll see what happens. Are you okay? Cordelia thought about the question. 3 months ago, she would have said she was fine, meaning she was merely surviving. Now? Yes, she said, and meant it. I think I actually am. Cordelia has found her strength, but the journey isn't over. Can a mother's love survive betrayal? Can a son learn to see his mother as a person, not just a role? Everything comes together, the truth, the pain, and finally, the healing. Will Cordelia and Grayson find their way back to each other? Or has too much been broken to ever be repaired? The answers might surprise you. What do you think should happen next? Let me know in the comments below. Summer arrived with a vengeance, Chicago humidity settling over everything like a wet blanket. Cordelia had been living in Eloan's guest suite for 6 months now, and the space had transformed from temporary shelter into something that felt startlingly like home. Plants lined the windowsills, gifts from seniors she'd visited who insisted on sharing clippings. Her paintings covered one wall, a gallery of her own making. The refrigerator displayed a rotating collection of the twins' artwork, each piece more precious than the last. She'd found a rhythm. Work during the week, visiting isolated seniors, connecting them with resources, listening to their stories. Weekends were for art classes. She was taking an advanced watercolor workshop now, and Sundays had become her day with Iris and Hollis. Grayson would drop them off in the morning, sometimes staying for coffee with stilted conversation, sometimes disappearing immediately. Either way, Cordelia got her grandchildren for the whole day, and that was enough. Almost enough. Because despite the apology, despite the tentative rebuilding, something remained unresolved between her and Grayson. They were polite, careful. They existed in each other's orbits without truly connecting. He asked surface questions about her work. She asked about his job. They talked about the twins. They never talked about what really mattered. The wound was still there, barely scabbed over, threatening to tear open with the slightest pressure. It was mid-July when everything changed. Cordelia was at work, reviewing case files for her upcoming visits, when her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. "Is this Cordelia Whitmore?" A woman's voice, professional but warm. "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Patricia Chin. I'm a social worker at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I have you listed as the emergency contact for Agnes Brennan." Cordelia's stomach dropped. Agnes, the artist she'd met during a wellness check, the woman whose words about making new choices had stayed with her. They'd become something close to friends over the past few months, Cordelia visiting even when it wasn't officially required. "Is she okay?" "She's had a fall. A neighbor found her this morning and called 911. She's stable now, but she's asking for you. She says she has no other family." "I'll be right there." Cordelia grabbed her bag, told Rita she had an emergency, and was out the door within minutes. The hospital was a 20-minute drive, traffic willing. She made it in 15, her heart pounding the entire way. Agnes looked small in the hospital bed, her silver hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual neat bun. Her left arm was in a cast, and there were bruises blooming across her face. But her eyes were alert when Cordelia entered. "There you are," Agnes said, her voice raspy. "I told them you'd come." Cordelia pulled a chair close to the bed, taking Agnes's good hand carefully. "What happened?" "What always happens when you're 83 and stubborn. I tried to change a light bulb without waiting for my neighbor to help. Fell off the step stool." Agnes managed a wry smile. "The universe's way of reminding me I'm not 20 anymore." "Agnes." I know. I'm an idiot." She squeezed Cordelia's hand. "But I'm glad you're here. I need to ask you something." "Anything." Agnes studied her for a long moment, those sharp eyes seeing more than Cordelia was comfortable with. "They want to discharge me in a few days. But I can't go home yet. Not alone. I'll need help for at least a few weeks, getting dressed, cooking, bathing. All the indignities of being broken." She took a breath. "I don't have anyone. My friends are all either dead or too old themselves to help. And I refuse to go to some depressing rehab facility where they'll treat me like I'm already in my grave." Cordelia felt where this was going. "What are you asking?" "Let me stay with you. Just temporarily. I'll pay you, I have money saved. And once I'm steady on my feet again, I'll figure out something more permanent." Agnes's grip tightened. "I know it's a lot to ask. But you're the only person I trust. The only person who sees me as more than just another elderly body taking up space." The request should have felt overwhelming. Should have felt like too much responsibility. But instead, Cordelia felt something else, the recognition of her own past reflected back at her. Agnes was where Cordelia had been 6 months ago, alone, vulnerable, trying not to be a burden, terrified of losing her independence. "Of course," Cordelia heard herself say. "Of course you can stay with me." Agnes's eyes filled with tears. "You mean it?" "I mean it. We'll figure it out together." Getting Agnes settled took coordination. Cordelia had to explain the situation to Aloan, who immediately offered to help convert the small living room in Cordelia's suite into a temporary bedroom. Rita granted Cordelia flexible hours so she could help with Agnes's care. And somehow, in the chaos of hospital discharge and medical equipment rental and medication schedules, something shifted in Cordelia. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something. A life that included helping others, not because she had to prove her worth, but because she genuinely wanted to. Because she could. Agnes moved in on a Thursday. She was grumpy about needing help, stubborn about doing things herself even when she clearly shouldn't, and utterly unfiltered in her observations about everything from hospital food to the state of modern society. Cordelia adored her. They fell into a routine. Mornings were slow, helping Agnes dress, making breakfast, reviewing the day's medications. Cordelia would go to work while a home health aide stayed with Agnes for a few hours. Evenings were for simple dinners, conversation, and sometimes Agnes would tell stories about her life while Cordelia painted. "You're getting better," Agnes observed one evening, watching Cordelia work on a new piece. "More confident in your brushstrokes." "I have a good teacher." "I haven't taught you anything." "You've taught me plenty. Just by being yourself. By refusing to apologize for taking up space." Cordelia set down her brush, studying the canvas. "I spent so many years making myself smaller, quieter, less, trying to fit into whatever shape other people needed me to be. And now I'm trying to figure out what shape I actually am." Agnes smiled. "That's the work of a lifetime, dear. And you're right on schedule." Sunday arrived with the twins' weekly visit. Cordelia had warned them about Agnes, explained that they'd need to be gentle, that there was a woman staying with her who'd been hurt. They arrived with Grayson, who insisted on walking them to the door. This had become his pattern, delivering them, picking them up, but rarely staying. Still keeping that careful distance. But when he saw Agnes sitting in Cordelia's living room, her cast propped on pillows, reading a book, something in his expression shifted. "Mom?" He looked between Cordelia and Agnes. "What's going on?" "Grayson, this is Agnes Brennan. She's a friend who needed a place to recover from a fall." "Agnes, this is my son Grayson, and my grandchildren, Iris and Hollis." The twins were already approaching Agnes with the careful curiosity of children who'd been taught to be respectful around fragile things. "Did it hurt?" Hollis asked, pointing at her cast. "When you fell." "Like the devil himself pinched me," Agnes said cheerfully. "But I'll live. Come here, let me look at you both properly." The twins settled near Agnes, asking questions with their usual lack of filter, while she answered with equal directness. Cordelia watched Grayson watching them, saw him taking in the scene, his mother's small apartment, the art on the walls, the comfortable clutter that spoke of a life being lived. "Can I talk to you?" Grayson said quietly. "In the kitchen?" Cordelia followed him into the small kitchenette, bracing herself. His face was unreadable, but there was tension in his shoulders. "You're taking care of someone," he said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes, she needed help. "I'm able to provide it." "For how long?" "As long as she needs." Cordelia crossed her arms. "Why does it matter?" "It matters because," Grayson stopped, rubbed his face. "Because I'm trying to understand. You left my house because you didn't want to be treated like a burden. And now you're taking on the burden of caring for someone else." The question was fair, but the phrasing made Cordelia's jaw tighten. "She's not a burden." "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did. That's exactly what you meant." Cordelia kept her voice low, aware of Agnes and the twins in the next room. "That's how you see it. Caring for someone is a burden. Being needed is a burden. But it's not, Grayson. It's a privilege. It's connection. It's the whole point of being human." "I know that." "Do you?" "Because you never acted like it. When I lived with you, every bit of help I needed was treated like an imposition. Every moment of vulnerability was held against me." Cordelia's voice shook. "But Agnes?" "She asked me for help, and it never occurred to me to make her feel guilty for it. Because I actually care about her. Because I see her as a person, not an obligation." The words hit their mark. Grayson flinched, his face going pale. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" Cordelia took a step closer. "Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you didn't make me feel guilty for existing in your space. For needing anything at all." Grayson's composure cracked. I was angry, okay? I was so angry and I didn't even know why. Then figure it out. Cordelia's voice was steel. Because I can't do this dance anymore. This thing where we pretend everything is fine but never actually talk about what happened. Either we deal with it, really deal with it, or we stop pretending there's anything left to save. The silence that followed was heavy. From the living room came the sound of the twins' laughter, Agnes saying something that made them giggle. Normal life, continuing around them while they stood in this moment of truth. I blamed you, Grayson finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. For Dad dying. Cordelia's breath caught. What? Not consciously. Not on purpose. But somewhere deep down, I blamed you. His eyes were red, tears threatening. Because he spent his whole life working himself to death to provide for us. And in the end, he died tired and worn out and never got to enjoy any of it. And I thought, his voice broke. I thought if you'd just worked more, contributed more, maybe he wouldn't have had to sacrifice so much. The confession hung between them, ugly and raw. Cordelia felt like she'd been punched. All this time, all his cruelty, and underneath was this, blame for something she'd never had control over. Your father had a heart attack, Cordelia said, her voice shaking. From genetics, from stress, from life. Not from me not working enough. Not from me being a burden. I know that. Logically, I know that. Grayson pressed his hands to his face. But feelings aren't logical. And I've been carrying this rage around for 2 years, and when you moved in, it all got directed at you. Every time I saw you, I saw Dad working double shifts. I saw him tired. I saw him dying in that hospital bed, and he sobbed, the sound torn from somewhere deep. I couldn't separate you from the pain. And that's not fair. None of it's fair. But it's the truth. Cordelia stood frozen, her own tears streaming down her face. This was what she'd needed to hear. Not another apology for his behavior, but the real reason behind it. The wound he'd been carrying that made him inflict wounds on her. Your father chose to work hard, she said quietly. He chose to provide for us because that's how he showed love. But I worked too, Grayson. I worked just as hard. Maybe not at jobs that paid well, but I kept our home running. I raised you. I cared for him when he got sick. I did everything I could. I know. Do you? Because it sounds like you think I was just sitting around while he broke his back for us. No. Grayson wiped his eyes roughly. I don't know what I think anymore. The therapist says I have unresolved grief. That I'm projecting. That I need to separate my anger at the situation from my anger at people who don't deserve it. And how's that going? Terribly. Obviously. He managed a weak laugh. I'm a mess, Mom. My marriage is falling apart. My kids barely talk to me except when they want something. And I ruined my relationship with the one person who actually loved me unconditionally. I did love you unconditionally, Cordelia said softly. I still do. But that doesn't mean I have to accept being treated like I'm worthless. I never thought you were worthless. Then why did you make me feel that way? The question was simple, but it held years of pain. Why did you look at me like I was something to be ashamed of? Why did you make me believe that needing help made me weak? Grayson didn't have an answer. Or maybe he had too many answers, none of them good enough. He leaned against the counter, looking older than his 45 years, looking lost in a way that reminded Cordelia of that little boy who'd once needed her to solve every problem. But she couldn't solve this for him. This was his work to do. I think, Cordelia said carefully, that you need to figure out who you want to be. Not who your father was, not who your grandfather was, but who Grayson Whitmore actually is. And until you do that, until you work through whatever rage and grief you're carrying, we're going to keep having these same painful conversations. What if I can't figure it out? Then we'll have a relationship that stays surface level and polite and safe. We'll share the twins. We'll see each other on holidays. We'll be family in name, but not in substance. Cordelia met his eyes. I've made peace with that possibility. Have you? The question clearly terrified him. Cordelia could see it in the way his breath quickened, the way his hands clenched. He didn't want that. But wanting something different and doing the work to achieve it were two separate things. I should go, Grayson said finally. let you get back to your guests. The twins are supposed to stay until 6. I know. I'll pick them up then. He moved toward the door, then paused. Mom? Thank you. For being honest. For not just letting me off the hook. You're welcome. After he left, Cordelia stood in the kitchen for a long moment, trying to steady her breathing. The conversation had been necessary, but it had opened wounds she'd been trying to let heal. She returned to the living room to find Agnes watching her with knowing eyes while the twins worked on a puzzle on the floor. That looked intense, Agnes said quietly. It was. Good. Intensity means you're actually dealing with things instead of burying them. Agnes shifted in her chair, wincing slightly. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this exactly right. Holding your ground. Not letting him use you as an emotional dumping ground while he figures out his mess. It doesn't feel right. It feels hard. The right things usually do. The weeks that followed settled into a new normal. Agnes's recovery was slow but steady, physical therapy 3 times a week, gradual increases in independence. She moved from needing help with everything to being able to manage most tasks on her own, though she still needed assistance with anything requiring 2 hands. Cordelia found the caregiving challenging in ways she hadn't expected. Not the physical tasks, but the emotional labor of helping someone maintain their dignity while accepting help. Of finding the balance between being supportive and being overbearing. She understood now, with painful clarity, what she'd wanted from Grayson. Not to be cared for as if she were helpless, but to be supported while maintaining her autonomy. To be seen as a whole person who sometimes needed help, not as a problem to be managed. The twins continued their Sunday visits, and slowly, they began to open up about what was happening at home. Their parents were fighting more. Their mother was gone a lot, spending time with friends, coming home late. Their father was sad, they said, in that matter-of-fact way children had of observing adult emotions without fully understanding them. Is Dad going to be okay? Iris asked one Sunday while they made cookies together, a controlled mess that Cordelia had learned to embrace. I think so, Cordelia said carefully. Sometimes grown-ups go through hard times. But that's not your fault, and it's not your job to fix it. Mom says it's because he works too much. Your mom might be right. But that's something they need to work out between themselves. Hollis looked up from the dough he was rolling. Is it because of you? Because we see you now. The question stopped Cordelia cold. What makes you think that? Mom got really mad when she found out Dad was bringing us here. She said he was choosing you over her. Hollis's face was troubled. But that doesn't make sense. Why can't he choose both? Cordelia's heart broke for them, caught in the middle of adult conflicts they shouldn't have to navigate. Your father loves you both so much. And he loves me, even if we haven't always shown it well. What's happening between your parents has nothing to do with you seeing me. That's about other things, grown-up things that are complicated and not your responsibility. But what if they get divorced? Iris's voice was small. Emily at school's parents got divorced, and now she has to go back and forth between houses, and she's always sad. If that happens, and I don't know if it will, then we'll figure it out together. But you'll still have people who love you. Your dad, your mom, me. That doesn't change. The twins seemed somewhat reassured, but Cordelia could see the worry lingering in their eyes. Later, after they'd left with Grayson, who'd barely spoken beyond the necessary greetings, Agnes observed, "Those children are carrying too much." I know. And their father needs to handle his business before he damages them permanently. I know that too. But I can't fix it for him. No, Agnes agreed. You can't. But you can be a safe place for those children. And sometimes, that's enough. August arrived with storms. The city turned gray and moody, rain falling in sheets that flooded streets and kept everyone huddled indoors. Cordelia's senior visits became more challenging, checking on people who couldn't get out, who were isolated by weather and age and circumstance. One afternoon, she visited a woman named Dorothy who lived alone in a small apartment in a building without an elevator. 5th floor. Dorothy was 91, fiercely independent, and desperately lonely. She spent their entire visit talking about her late husband, her children who never called, her friends who'd all died. The words poured out of her like water from a broken dam, decades of loneliness spilling over. I'm sorry, Dorothy said finally, wiping her eyes. You probably have other people to see. I'm taking up too much of your time. You're not taking up anything, Cordelia said firmly. This is my job. And even if it wasn't, I'd still want to be here. Why? I'm just a silly old woman who talks too much. You're a person with stories to tell. With a life that matters. Cordelia took Dorothy's weathered hand. You don't stop mattering just because you get old. You don't stop deserving connection and love and attention. Dorothy's face crumpled. I wish my children understood that. The words echoed in Cordelia's mind all the way home. How many elderly people were sitting alone, believing they no longer mattered? How many had children who saw them as obligations rather than people? How many were where she'd been 6 months ago, before Aloan and Rita and Agnes had reminded her that she was more than just someone's mother? That evening, as she helped Agnes with dinner, Agnes could manage most things now, but Cordelia still assisted with cutting and anything requiring 2 hands. She said, I want to start a support group. Agnes looked up from the vegetables she was washing. What kind of support group? For seniors who feel isolated, who need connection. We could meet weekly at the community center. Share meals, tell stories, just be together. The idea was forming as she spoke, gaining shape and clarity. So many people I visit are desperately lonely. They need community, purpose, a reminder that they still matter. That's a beautiful idea. Agnes smiled. And you're the perfect person to run it. You think so? I know so. You have empathy. You listen. You make people feel seen. Agnes set down the vegetables, her good hand finding Cordelia's. You've made me feel seen. Every single day. You've done the same for me. Then let's do this thing. Start your group. I'll be your first member. And I bet we can get Aloan involved too. She's always looking for new programs to justify her budget. The support group became Cordelia's project. She pitched it to Rita, who approved immediately. They'd meet Thursday evenings, potluck style, open to anyone over 65. The goal wasn't therapy or structured programming, just connection. A space where being old wasn't something to apologize for, but something to celebrate. The first meeting in early September drew 8 people. By the third meeting, there were 15. By October, they had to move to a larger room to accommodate everyone. The group became something special. People shared recipes and stories. They laughed and argued and supported each other through difficulties. Some were widowed, like Cordelia and Agnes. Some were estranged from their families. Some simply wanted connection beyond their daily routines. And Cordelia, quiet, invisible Cordelia, who'd once believed her only value was in serving others, became the person who brought them together. Not because she had all the answers, but because she knew what it felt like to be unseen. And she refused to let anyone else feel that way if she could help it. October arrived with falling leaves and crisp air. Agnes had recovered enough to move back to her own apartment, though she'd become such a fixture in Cordelia's life that the transition felt bittersweet. I'm not disappearing, Agnes assured her as they packed up the last of her things. You're stuck with me now. I'll be at every support group meeting, and I expect weekly coffee dates. Minimum. I'd like that. Good. Because you've become something I never expected at 83, a best friend. Agnes's eyes were suspiciously bright. You saved my life, Cordelia. Not just by letting me stay here, but by reminding me that I'm not done yet. That there's still joy to be found. You did the same for me. They hugged carefully, mindful of Agnes's still healing arm, and Cordelia felt gratitude so profound it hurt. 6 months ago, she'd been sleeping in a garage room, believing she was worthless. Now she had friends. Purpose. A life she'd built from nothing but determination and the kindness of people who'd seen her when she couldn't see herself. The next Sunday, when Grayson brought the twins, he lingered at the door. Mom, can we talk? Actually talk, I mean. Not just the surface stuff. Cordelia studied him. He looked different, less tired, maybe, or perhaps just less defeated. Okay, let me get the twins settled with a movie. Once the twins were occupied, Cordelia and Grayson sat at her small kitchen table. She made coffee, buying time to prepare herself for whatever was coming. I've been in therapy, Grayson said without preamble. Twice a week. Individual and couples counseling with Sloane. How's it going? Hard. Really hard. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. I'm learning things about myself I don't like. Patterns I inherited. Ways I hurt people without meaning to. That takes courage. To look at yourself honestly. I don't feel courageous. I feel like I'm constantly being confronted with what an asshole I've been. He managed a weak smile. The therapist says that's part of the process. That you have to face the damage before you can heal it. What have you learned? Cordelia asked gently. That I've been using control to manage anxiety. That when Dad died, I felt completely out of control, and I tried to fix it by controlling everything and everyone around me. He met her eyes. Including you. Especially you. Because you represented everything I was afraid of: vulnerability, need, the possibility that I might end up alone and helpless someday. The honesty was startling. Cordelia set down her coffee cup. Go on. I was terrified of becoming like you. Of losing everything and having to depend on someone else's mercy. So I tried to, I don't know, distance myself? Make you into something less human so I wouldn't have to face my fear. His voice cracked. But all I did was hurt you. And lose you. Which is exactly what I was afraid of. You didn't lose me, Grayson. I'm right here. But not in the way I took for granted. Not as someone who has to forgive me just because we're family. He blinked rapidly. The therapist asked me what I was most afraid of, and I realized it was this: that you'd be okay without me. That you'd build a life and be happy, and I wouldn't be necessary anymore. The confession hung between them, vulnerable and true. Cordelia felt her anger softening, not disappearing but transmuting into something else. Understanding, maybe. Or just the recognition of shared fear. I am okay without you, she said quietly. I'm more than okay. I'm happy. Grayson flinched. But, Cordelia continued, that doesn't mean I don't want you in my life. It means I don't need you to survive. And maybe that's actually better. Maybe love that comes from want instead of need is stronger. More honest. Is that possible? For us, I mean. I don't know. Maybe. Cordelia reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. But it would require you to actually see me. Not as your mother, or not only as your mother, but as Cordelia. A whole person with dreams and fears and a life that exists beyond how it relates to you. I want that. I want to know you. Grayson's voice was thick with emotion. Will you tell me? About your life now? About who you've become. So Cordelia told him. About her work with isolated seniors. About the support group she'd started. About Agnes and the weeks of caregiving that had taught her the difference between being a burden and being human. About her art, the classes she was taking, the paintings she'd sold at a local gallery. She told him about discovering at 72 that she wasn't done growing. That she had dreams beyond being someone's mother or wife. That she was still figuring out who Cordelia Whitmore was, and it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Grayson listened with an attention he'd never given her before. Really listened, asking questions, showing genuine interest. And slowly, tentatively, something began to shift between them. The walls didn't come down completely. That would take time, maybe years, but cracks appeared. Light filtered through. I'm proud of you, Grayson said when she finished. I should have said that months ago. Years ago. But I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the life you're building. Of who you are. The words landed differently than they would have 6 months ago. Then, Cordelia would have clung to them, needed them, let them define her worth. Now they were simply nice to hear. Validation, but not necessity. Thank you, she said simply. Sloane and I are separating, Grayson said abruptly. Not divorcing yet, but taking space. She's moving into her own apartment for a while. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's the right thing. We've been making each other miserable for years. He rubbed his face tiredly. The therapist says we fell into a dynamic where she'd push me to be more successful, more wealthy, more impressive, and I'd resent her for it while still doing exactly what she wanted. And you became this lightning rod for all our dysfunction. That's not entirely fair to her, Cordelia found herself saying. I'm sure she had her reasons. She did. She does. Her own issues she needs to work through. Grayson smiled sadly. But that doesn't excuse how we treated you. How I let her treat you. I should have stood up for you. I should have protected you instead of throwing you to the wolves. You should have. But you didn't. And now we're here. Cordelia squeezed his hand. The question is, where do we go from here? I'd like to try again. To build something real. Not the relationship we had before. That's gone, and maybe that's okay, but something new. Something based on who we actually are instead of who we think we should be. That would require work. From both of us. I know. And I'm willing to do it. Whatever it takes. Grayson's eyes were earnest, almost desperate. I can't lose you again, Mom. I can't lose the chance to actually know you. Cordelia looked at her son, this man who'd hurt her so deeply, who was finally beginning to understand the damage he'd caused, and felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the possibility of it. The tiny green shoot of hope pushing up through scorched earth. Okay, she said softly. Let's try. The holidays approached with the usual commercial frenzy. The community center was planning a Thanksgiving potluck for the support group, and Cordelia found herself in charge of organizing it. The twins asked if they could help, and she said yes without hesitation. They spent the Saturday before Thanksgiving making decorations in her apartment, paper turkeys and leaf garlands, and place cards for every attendee. Grayson picked them up at the end of the day and, when invited, stayed for dinner. It was simple: spaghetti and salad, garlic bread from the store. But they sat around Cordelia's small table, and for the first time in years, it felt like family. Not perfect. Not healed. But real. Can we have Thanksgiving here? Hollis asked suddenly. With you and Grandma Cordelia and Miss Agnes and Miss Aloan? Grayson and Cordelia exchanged glances. She could see him calculating what Sloane would say, what traditions would be broken, what it would mean to choose this over whatever had been planned. I think, Grayson said slowly, that sounds perfect. If your grandmother doesn't mind hosting. I'd love to, Cordelia said, and meant it. Thanksgiving arrived cold and clear. Cordelia's small apartment could barely hold everyone: Grayson and the twins, Aloan and her sister Margot, Agnes and 3 other members of the support group who had nowhere else to go. They squeezed around a table made from pushing Cordelia's small one against a folding table Aloan had brought. The food was potluck style, nothing fancy, but abundant and made with love. Before they ate, Grayson asked if they could go around the table and say what they were grateful for. It was the kind of thing Cordelia would have mocked as performative 6 months ago, but now she found herself curious about what people would say. The twins went first, listing off Pokemon and friends and no school. Margot was grateful for wine and sarcasm. Agnes was grateful for second chances and found family. When it came to Grayson, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm grateful for my mother. For her strength. For her grace in the face of my cruelty. And for her willingness to let me try to do better. His voice cracked on the last word. Iris reached over and took his hand. Cordelia's turn came last. She looked around the table at these people, some she'd known for months, some for only weeks, who had become her chosen family. Who had reminded her that she was worth more than she'd believed. Who had given her space to become herself. I'm grateful, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her, for every person at this table. For teaching me that it's never too late to start over. That being needed isn't the same as being loved. And that sometimes the family you choose is just as important as the family you're born into. She met Grayson's eyes. And I'm grateful for second chances. For both of us. The meal was chaotic and loud, people talking over each other, reaching across the table, laughing at stories and jokes. It was nothing like the formal, tense Thanksgivings at Grayson's house, where everything had been perfect and cold and empty. This was messy and warm and full of life. This was home. December arrived with the first snow. The community center was decorated for the holidays, and the support group planned their own celebration, a white elephant gift exchange and carol singing and too many cookies. Cordelia was at work, finishing up paperwork before the party, when Grayson appeared at the front desk. He wasn't supposed to pick up the twins for another hour. Is everything okay? Cordelia asked, immediately worried. Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. He held up a large envelope. I wanted to show you something. In private, if you have a minute. Curious, Cordelia led him to the small conference room. They sat across from each other at the battered table, and Grayson slid the envelope toward her. What is this? Open it. Inside were legal documents. Cordelia's hands trembled slightly as she pulled them out, scanning the dense text. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at. A trust. In her name. I don't understand, she said, looking up at Grayson. When Dad died, he had a life insurance policy. A decent one. I used some of it to pay off the house, some for the twins' college funds. Grayson's voice was steady but emotional. But there was money left over. Money I kept, telling myself I was investing it for the future. For emergencies. Grayson, let me finish. Please. He took a breath. The truth is, that money should have been split with you. Dad would have wanted you to have it. But I was angry and I convinced myself you didn't deserve it. That you hadn't contributed enough to deserve his legacy. Cordelia's throat closed. I was wrong. About so many things, but especially about this. Grayson gestured to the documents. There's $150,000 in that trust. It's yours. No strings attached. You can use it however you want, save it, invest it, travel, buy a house. Whatever you need. The number was staggering. Cordelia stared at the papers, unable to process what this meant. Financial security. True independence. Choices she'd never imagined having. I can't accept this, she heard herself say. Why not? Because it feels like you're trying to buy forgiveness. I'm not. Grayson leaned forward, his eyes intense. I'm trying to give you what should have been yours all along. What Dad would have wanted you to have. This isn't about forgiveness. This is about what's right. But, Mom. He reached across the table, taking her hand. You've spent your whole life putting everyone else first. You worked yourself to exhaustion for me. You cared for Dad when he was sick. You gave and gave and gave, and what did you get in return? A room in my house that I made you feel guilty for occupying. Tears streamed down Cordelia's face now, unstoppable. Take the money. Build the life you want. And know that it's not charity, it's not guilt, it's just what you've always deserved. His voice broke. Please. Let me do this one thing right. Cordelia looked at the documents through blurred vision, then at her son. She saw him clearly now, not the cold, cruel man who'd hurt her, but a broken person trying to put himself back together. Trying to make amends in the only way he knew how. And she realized something. Accepting this didn't make her weak. It didn't make her dependent. It made her smart enough to recognize when a gift was genuine, when an apology was more than words. Okay, she whispered. Okay, thank you. Grayson's face crumpled with relief. He came around the table and pulled her into a hug, tentative at first, then tighter as she hugged him back. They stood there in the dingy conference room, holding each other while years of hurt began, finally, to heal. I love you, Mom, Grayson said into her hair. I'm so sorry it took me this long to show it properly. I love you too. Cordelia pulled back, wiping her eyes. And I forgive you. Not because of the money, but because I can see you're trying. Really trying. I am. Every day. He wiped his own eyes. The therapist says healing isn't linear. That I'll probably mess up again, say the wrong thing, fall into old patterns. But I'm committed to doing better. To being better. That's all I can ask for. They returned to the front desk to find the twins had arrived with Aloan, who'd offered to bring them to the holiday party. The kids were already wearing Santa hats and bouncing with excitement about the cookie decorating station. Everything okay? Aloan asked, reading Cordelia's tear-stained face with concern. Everything's perfect, Cordelia said, and meant it. The holiday party was exactly the chaos Cordelia had hoped for. 23 seniors crowded into the room, talking and laughing and eating with abandon. Agnes held court at one table, telling scandalous stories about her youth in Paris. Dorothy, who'd become a regular member, was teaching anyone who'd listen how to knit. The twins moved through the crowd like visiting dignitaries, collecting hugs and compliments on their decorations. And Cordelia stood back, watching it all, feeling something she hadn't felt in years: pride. She'd built this. Not alone, never alone, but she'd been the catalyst. She'd taken her own pain and loneliness and transformed it into something that helped others. She'd created community where there was isolation, connection where there was loneliness. She mattered. Not because she was useful to someone else, but because she'd chosen to matter. Because she'd decided her life had value, and she'd made it true through action. "You did good, kid," Eloan said, appearing at her elbow with 2 cups of punch. "Look at all these happy people. That's because of you. It's because of all of us." "Sure. But you started it. You saw a need and filled it. That takes vision." Eloan clinked her cup against Cordelia's. "You know what's really beautiful? 6 months ago, you thought you had nothing to offer. Now look at you. You're literally changing lives." "I'm just doing what I can." "No, you're doing what matters. There's a difference." Eloan's smile was warm. "I'm proud of you. In case nobody's said that today. Actually, someone has." Cordelia glanced at Grayson, who was helping Iris arrange cookies on a platter. "But I'll never get tired of hearing it." As the party wound down and people began to leave, each one stopped to hug Cordelia, to thank her for the evening, to tell her how much the group meant to them. Each small interaction was a gift, a reminder that she'd created something real. Agnes was one of the last to leave. She hugged Cordelia tight and whispered, "You know what the secret is? To living a good life." "What?" "Mattering to people. And letting people matter to you. That's it. That's the whole thing." Agnes pulled back, her eyes twinkling. "And you, my dear, have mastered it." After everyone had gone and the room was cleaned up, Cordelia walked home through the softly falling snow. The city was quiet, the streets frosted with white, Christmas lights twinkling in windows. She felt tired but satisfied, the kind of exhaustion that came from doing meaningful work. Her phone buzzed. A text from Grayson. "Thank you for including us tonight. The twins haven't stopped talking about it. They want to know if they can help with the next event." Cordelia smiled as she typed back, "Of course. They're always welcome." A pause, then, "I meant what I said earlier. About being proud of you. I hope you know that." "I do. Thank you. Good night, Mom. Love you." "Love you too." She tucked her phone away and continued walking, thinking about how much had changed. A year ago, she'd been invisible in her son's house, sleeping in a room the size of a closet, believing her best years were behind her. Now she had her own space, meaningful work, real friendships, and a relationship with her son that was finally beginning to feel honest. And money. Enough money to make real choices about her future. The possibilities stretched before her like the snow-covered street, blank, beautiful, full of potential. Christmas morning arrived bright and cold. Cordelia woke in her own bed, in her own apartment, surrounded by gifts she'd carefully wrapped for the twins. They were coming over later, along with Grayson, for a quiet celebration. Sloane had the kids on Christmas Eve, and Cordelia got them Christmas morning, a new arrangement everyone was still adjusting to, but it was working. She made coffee and sat by her small tree, thinking about Christmases past. The lean ones when Grayson was young, when she and Harold had scraped together enough for a few modest gifts and a special meal. The later ones when Grayson was grown and sent expensive presents with gift receipts attached, more obligation than love. Last year's Christmas, spent feeling like an intruder in Grayson's pristine house, unwrapping a generic scarf Sloane had clearly bought without thought. This Christmas was different. This Christmas was hers. The doorbell rang at 10. Cordelia opened it to find not just Grayson and the twins, but Eloan and Agnes too. "Surprise!" the twins shouted in unison. "We formed a conspiracy," Eloan explained, carrying in a dish of what looked like homemade cinnamon rolls. "Figured you shouldn't spend Christmas with just the 3 of them. You need your people. Plus, my apartment is depressing on holidays," Agnes added, limping in with a wrapped gift. "Too quiet. Too many memories. This is better." Cordelia's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time. "Come in. All of you. Please." They crowded into her small space, and it felt full in the best way. Warm and loud and alive. They ate cinnamon rolls and opened presents, small, thoughtful things that showed people had actually paid attention to who she was. Art supplies from Aloan. A vintage cookbook from Agnes. A beautiful scarf from Grayson that was nothing like the one from last year, this one clearly chosen with care. Drawings and clay creations from the twins that would immediately go on her refrigerator. And from Cordelia to Grayson, a painting she'd done, the beach scene she'd been working on for months, finally finished. But she'd made a change to it. The woman walking away in the background was now facing forward, and beside her was a small figure. A boy reaching for her hand. Past and present, meeting in the middle. Grayson stared at it for a long moment, his jaw working. "Mom, this is..." "It's us," Cordelia said softly. "Who we were. Who we're trying to become. It's perfect." His voice was thick. Can I hang it in my office? I want to see it every day. As a reminder. Of what? Of what matters. Of what I almost lost." He looked at her, tears in his eyes. "Of who you are when I remember to actually look." They hugged, and the twins piled on, and suddenly everyone was hugging in a chaotic, beautiful mess of family, chosen and given, broken and healing. This, Cordelia thought, is what love should feel like. Not perfect, but real. Not without pain, but honest about it. Not demanded, but freely given. January arrived with new beginnings. Cordelia used some of the trust money to hire an assistant for the support group, a young social work student who needed experience and brought fresh energy. She enrolled in a year-long intensive art program at the local college, something she'd dreamed about for decades, but never thought possible. She also, after much deliberation, bought a small condo. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom place with good light for painting and enough space to host her support group occasionally. Aloan helped her move, insisting on breaking in the new space with a champagne toast. "Look at you," Aloan said, raising her glass in the empty living room, their voices echoing off the bare walls. Homeowner. Artist. Community organizer. Who knew all of this was hiding inside quiet little Cordelia Whitmore? "I did," Cordelia said. "I think I always did. I just forgot for a while." "Well, you remembered. And just in time." Aloan clinked their glasses together. "Here's to second acts. And third acts. And however many acts you need. To however many acts I need." The twins helped her decorate, hanging artwork and arranging furniture with the seriousness of professional designers. Grayson came by regularly, sometimes with tools to help with projects, sometimes just to sit and talk. Real conversations now about his therapy, his struggles, his hopes for the future. "I'm thinking about scaling back at work," he told her one evening while they assembled a bookshelf. "Spending more time with the kids. With people who matter." "That sounds healthy." "It sounds terrifying." He laughed, but there was real fear in his eyes. "I've spent so long defining myself by professional success. If I'm not the guy working 80-hour weeks, who am I?" "Maybe you get to find out." Cordelia handed him a screwdriver. "Maybe that's the whole point. Figuring out who Grayson is when he's not performing for everyone else." "Is that what you're doing?" "Figuring out who Cordelia is. Every day. And you know what? She's pretty interesting. I'm starting to really like her." Grayson smiled. "I'm starting to really like her too. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see her. But you see her now. That's what matters." By March, Cordelia's life had taken on a shape that felt sustainable. Beautiful, even. She worked 3 days a week at the community center, enough to stay connected, but not so much that she was exhausted. The support group had grown to 30 regular members and was spawning satellite groups in other neighborhoods. Her art was improving. She'd sold several paintings at a local gallery and had been invited to participate in a group show. And her relationship with Grayson, while still imperfect, felt real. They had dinner together once a week, just the two of them, talking about everything and nothing. He asked her advice sometimes about the kids, about his life, about decisions he was facing. And she gave it, but she also set boundaries, refusing to become his therapist or his confessor. They were finding their way to something new. Not what they'd had before. That was gone forever, and maybe that was okay. but something more honest, more equal. One Sunday afternoon, while the twins were at a birthday party and Grayson had come over to help Cordelia hang a new painting, he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy?" "Really happy, I mean. Not just okay or managing, but actually happy." Cordelia considered the question seriously. Was she happy? Not in the uncomplicated way of her youth, when happiness had seemed simple and permanent, but in a deeper, more textured way. A happiness that included pain and growth and uncertainty, but was real nonetheless. "Yes," she said finally. "I am. I'm happy in a way I didn't know I could be. In a way that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval or acceptance." That's what I wanted to hear. Grayson's smile was genuine. "I know I can't undo the past. Can't erase what I did. But knowing you found happiness anyway, that you didn't let me destroy you, that helps." "I didn't do it to help you," Cordelia said gently but firmly. "I did it because I had to. Because the alternative was giving up, and I wasn't ready to do that." "I know. And that makes it even more meaningful." He stepped back, studying the newly hung painting, one of Cordelia's recent pieces, an abstract of vibrant colors that seemed to dance across the canvas. "You know what Dad would say if he could see you now?" Cordelia's throat tightened. "What?" "He'd say, 'That's my girl. Always knew she had it in her.'" Grayson's eyes were wet. "He believed in you so much, Mom. I wish I'd learned that from him instead of taking so long to figure it out myself. He believed in you too. He'd be proud of the work you're doing. The changes you're making." "You think so?" "I know so." They stood together in comfortable silence, looking at the painting, both thinking about the man they'd loved who'd brought them together but couldn't hold them there. Who'd done his best, but left them both with wounds they were only now beginning to heal. "I'm going to keep trying," Grayson said quietly. "To be better. To do better. For the kids. For myself. For you. That's all I can ask." "Is it enough? Will I ever be able to make up for what I did?" Cordelia turned to face him fully. "You can't make up for it. But you can learn from it. You can become someone who would never do that again. You can break the patterns so Iris and Hollis never have to feel what I felt." She touched his face gently. "That's redemption, Grayson. Not erasing the past, but creating a different future." He covered her hand with his. "I love you, Mom. I love you too. Always have. Always will." She smiled. "Even when I didn't like you very much." He laughed through his tears. "Fair enough." April brought Cordelia's 73rd birthday. The support group threw her a party, a surprise one that Agnes and Eloan had planned with ridiculous attention to detail. The community center was decorated with streamers and balloons, and there was a cake that read Cordelia, still becoming. The phrase made her cry. Because it was true. She was still becoming. Still changing and growing and figuring out who she was. And at 73, that felt like a victory. The twins had made her cards covered in glitter and declarations of love written in marker. Grayson gave her a gift certificate to an art supply store and a promise. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. No questions asked. Agnes gave her a painting, one of her own early works, from before her eyesight failed. A vibrant abstract that looked like joy made visible. "For reminding me that it's never too late," Agnes said as they hugged. "For showing me that starting over isn't failure. It's courage. You showed me that first. Then we showed each other. That's how it works." As the party wound down and people began to leave, Cordelia stood in the center of the community center, this place that had saved her life in ways she couldn't have imagined a year ago, and felt profoundly grateful. Not for the easy things. Not for a life without pain or struggle. But for the resilience she'd discovered. For the people who'd reminded her she mattered. For the strength it took to stand up and say, "I deserve better," and then actually believe it. Grayson was the last to leave, lingering at the door. "Mom? I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up. On yourself. On me. On the possibility that things could be different." His voice was thick with emotion. "You could have walked away completely. Cut me out of your life. I would have deserved it. Maybe. But that's not who I am." Cordelia squeezed his hand. "I'm someone who believes in second chances. In redemption. in the possibility that people can change if they're willing to do the work. I'm doing the work. Every day. I know. I see it. She smiled. And I'm proud of you. For facing your demons. For trying to be better. That takes real courage. After he left, Cordelia sat alone in the quiet center, watching the evening light slant through the windows. She thought about where she'd been a year ago, broken, invisible, believing her life was over. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain, the fear, the slow rediscovery of herself. And she thought about the future, uncertain, yes, but full of possibility. She had work that mattered. People who loved her. Art to create. Stories to tell. A life that was hers, built from the ashes of what she'd lost. She was 73 years old. And she was just getting started. 6 months later. The gallery opening was small but elegant. Emerging artists, a retrospective of new beginnings, read the banner. Cordelia's work occupied one wall, 8 paintings that told a story of transformation. The beach scene with Harold and young Grayson. The portrait of weathered hands holding a paintbrush. A vibrant abstract titled Becoming. And 5 new pieces, each one bolder and more confident than the last. The twins stood beside her, dressed up and proud, serving as her personal publicists to anyone who would listen. That's our grandma's art, they told everyone. She's really talented. She only started a year ago. Isn't that amazing? Grayson stood back, watching with an expression Cordelia couldn't quite read. When she caught his eye, he smiled, not the tight, performative smile from before, but something real and warm. Eloan moved through the crowd like a force of nature, talking up Cordelia's work to anyone who would listen. Agnes sat in a chair by the entrance, greeting people with her usual combination of charm and bluntness. "This is wild," Cordelia whispered to Eloan during a quiet moment. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. Now I have a gallery show. A year ago, you thought you were invisible. Now look at you." Eloan gestured at the crowd, at the paintings, at the life Cordelia had built. "You're the most visible person in this room. I don't need to be visible to everyone. Just to myself. And are you? Can you see yourself clearly now?" Cordelia looked around, at her art on the walls, at her family and friends celebrating her, at the life she'd created from nothing but determination and the kindness of people who'd seen her when she couldn't see herself. "Yes," she said softly. "I can see myself. And I like what I see." Later, after most of the crowd had left and only her inner circle remained, Grayson approached with a small wrapped box. "One more birthday present," he said. "I've been waiting for the right moment." Inside was a locket, antique silver, delicate and beautiful. Cordelia opened it to find 2 photos. One side showed her and Harold on their wedding day, young and hopeful. The other showed her recent portrait, the one from the support group's newsletter, laughing at something off camera. "Past and present," Grayson said quietly. "Who you were and who you've become. Both versions matter. Both versions deserve to be remembered." Cordelia's eyes filled with tears. "Grayson, it's an apology I'll keep making for the rest of my life. And a promise that I'll never again try to make you into something you're not." He helped her fasten it around her neck. "You're extraordinary, Mom. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." She hugged him tight, and he hugged her back, and for the first time in years, it felt like home. Not the home she'd lost, but a new one. One built on honesty and respect and love that had been tested and survived. As the evening ended and everyone prepared to leave, Cordelia stood one more time in front of her paintings. 8 pieces of canvas and paint that told the story of a woman who'd been broken and put herself back together. Who'd been invisible and learned to be seen. Who'd believed her life was over and discovered it was just beginning. "What are you thinking?" Agnes asked, appearing at her elbow. "That I'm glad I didn't give up. That I'm grateful for every person who reminded me I was worth fighting for." Cordelia smiled. "And that I'm excited to see what comes next. More art. More everything. More life. More chances to figure out who I am and who I want to become." She turned to Agnes. "You were right, about it never being too late. About always having the power to make new choices. Of course I was right. I'm 84. I've earned the right to be right about things. Agnes squeezed her arm. But you did the hard part. You chose to believe it. You chose to try. The gallery lights dimmed, signaling closing time. Cordelia gathered her things, said her goodbyes, and walked out into the October evening with her family and friends surrounding her. The air was crisp, autumn settling into winter. A year ago, she'd been standing in a different place, a garage, surrounded by boxes, trying to figure out how to survive. Now she was here. Not just surviving, but thriving. Living a life she'd built with her own hands, supported by people who loved her not for what she could give them, but for who she was. She was Cordelia Whitmore, artist, social worker, friend, grandmother, mother, survivor. Someone who'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that her worth wasn't determined by other people's ability to see it. That she deserved love, respect, and dignity simply by virtue of existing. That it was never, ever too late to start over. As they walked toward the parking lot, Iris slipped her small hand into Cordelia's. Grandma, will you teach me to paint? Like really paint, not just the kid stuff. Cordelia looked down at her granddaughter's hopeful face and felt her heart expand. I'd love to. We can start this weekend if you want. Can I come too? Hollis asked immediately. Of course. Both of you. Always. Grayson's hand landed gently on her shoulder. She looked up at him, this man who'd hurt her, who'd learned, who was trying every day to be better, and smiled. Thank you for coming tonight, she said. Thank you for inviting me. For letting me be part of this. Part of your life. You're my son. You'll always be part of my life. Even after everything? Especially after everything. Cordelia squeezed his hand. That's what love means. Not pretending the hard parts didn't happen, but choosing each other anyway. Choosing to keep trying. They stood there in the parking lot as the others loaded into cars, as the gallery lights went dark behind them, as the city hummed with evening life around them. A family broken and healed, lost and found, imperfect but real. And Cordelia, 73 years old and finally herself, thought, this is enough. This is more than enough. This is everything. The future stretched before her, full of possibility and uncertainty and life. She was ready for all of it. She was ready to keep becoming. Cordelia's journey from invisible to unstoppable reminds us that it's never too late to reclaim your life. That your worth isn't defined by how others treat you. That sometimes the most radical act is simply believing you deserve better and then making it true. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself in Cordelia's struggle or her triumph, please share it. Someone in your life might need this reminder. You matter. Your dreams matter. And it's never, ever too late to start over. What part of Cordelia's story resonated most with you? How have you found the courage to stand up for your own worth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you want to see more stories about resilience, redemption, and the power of second chances, make sure to subscribe. Because everyone deserves to know they're not alone in their struggles, and that transformation is always possible, no matter your age or circumstances. Thank you for taking this journey with Cordelia. May we all find the courage to become who we were always meant to be.